Today, it's my pleasure to interview Dr. Clive Wynne. Dr. Clive Wynne was born and raised on the Isle of Wight in the United Kingdom. He obtained his PhD in psychology for a dissertation on the behavior of Barbary doves, also called turtle doves, at Edinburgh University in 1986. Dr. Wynne has served on the faculty of the University of Western Australia and at the University of Florida before arriving at Arizona State University in 2013, where he is a psychology professor. Dr. Wynne is also a behavioral psychologist with a fascination for dogs and their wild relatives. He established and directed the Canine Science Collaboratory at Arizona State University in Tempe and is the director of research at Wolf Park in Battleground, Indiana. He is the author of several academic books and of more than 100 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles that rank among the most highly cited studies on dog psychology. He has also published pieces in Psychology Today, The New Scientist, and the New York Times, among others. His latest book is Dog is Love, Why and How Your Dog Loves You. So now we're listening to Dr. Clive Wynne. Hi, Dr. Clive Wynne. That's how we pronounce your name, yes?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay. So to begin with the beginning, can you explain, if it can be explained, why you became so fascinated with the minds of other species than the human species, even when you were a kid?
Well, Esther, I'm not sure. It's so deep, so long ago, that I cannot fully rationalize it. So I just know that we had animals around the house, cat, turtle, later a dog. And I just wondered, I just remember from the longest back I can think of, how do they work? They clearly, very quickly as a child, you realize they're not just machines. Yeah. They're not simple machines. And yet they're not like your family and your friends and so on. They're not that. So what are they? And that kind of is the abiding mystery that has kept with me all the way along. I like to say, so, you know, when I was a kid, the Americans went to the moon and all this kind of stuff. And people would say, well, could there be minds on other planets, you know? Yeah. And I want to know, well, what about the other minds on our own planet, which is a much more, it would seem like a much simpler mystery because they're right there, you know, the cat, the dog, whatever, the squirrels, we have foxes out there. They're much closer. It doesn't require massive rockets. And yet, in fact, as I've become more of an expert, you know, as I've studied it, they are deeply mysterious. It's a deeply mysterious thing, what kinds of minds other species can have.
And I think sometimes we don't look at what is just under our nose.
Yeah.
Like I asked Alan Beck, why no one really studied in depth the relationship between people and their pets before you wrote your book with Aaron Kachner. And he said, because we thought that it was too easy, too obvious.
Well, I think with our pets, I mean, Alan would know better than I do, but I think that there was a feeling that the pet keeping lacked seriousness, that it just wasn't a serious activity. It was a frivolous activity. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a feeling that it didn't matter. That said, of course, that old Nazi Konrad Lorenz, he studied pets from the very beginning, and he always emphasized, to give the old devil credit, he always emphasized the value of studying animals that had formed relationships.
So if we take a step in time, you studied the behavior of marsupials as a professor at the University of Western Australia. And you wrote in your book, the fat-tailed dunnart, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, dunnart, a gorgeous little mouse-like animal with less than 1/10 of an ounce of brain tissue, was a really quick learner. So can you tell us what you taught? What did you teach to this fat-tailed dunnart?
Well, thank you, Esther, for bringing that up. People don't often ask me about my research on the fat-tailed dunnart. But first, let me say the fat-tailed dunnart, I wish I had a picture because they were such cute little animals. They're like a little mouse about the size of my fist, but with enormous eyes and enormous ears. So already that gives you a clue that this is an animal that's paying attention to the world around it, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be something going on. Otherwise, why would you bother having these big eyes and these enormous ears? Beautiful little animal. And unlike so many Australian marsupials, not endangered, a very successful little animal. And so there's a super simple test of learning that's been done in animal psychology going back nearly a century. You just ask an animal, well, you give an animal two choices, okay, and you say to the animal, food here, food here. You let the animal learn the food's on this side. And then when the animal has mastered that the food's on this side, you then say, nope, food here now, food here now. And then when the animal has grasped that the food is here now, you switch again. And so you switch and you switch and you switch and you switch. And it's super simple. And you can adjust how you present the food to suit the capacities of the individual animal. And then you can compare. Some species pick this up really slowly. And we did study one marsupial that was a very slow animal. And that's the famous quokka, which is somewhat more like a bunny rabbit. And like a bunny rabbit. Sorry?
They are cute.
Oh, they're very cute. I mean, they're all
not
very cute.
Fast.
Yeah, they're very cute, but they're like rabbits. You're just eating grass. You know, the grass doesn't go anywhere, right? You don't need, this is the thing. I mean, I'm happy to talk about the intelligence of different species, but at some more scientific level, I don't believe in the idea of intelligence of species. Animals have to live, they have to survive and thrive in the environment that they find themselves in. If you're a quokka and you're just eating grass, you just need certain basic eating skills.
And that's
how. The fat-tailed dunnart has a very, very challenging life. They eat insects, they catch insects that fly past them or run past them. So they're predators. So they have to be really quick if you're going to get the insect. But at the same time, every time they run out from under a stone to try and catch an insect, there's a risk that a bigger predator, like particularly a bird hovering above, can swoop down and catch them and eat them. So that's why they have such big eyes and big ears.
Yeah.
Their lifestyle is immensely challenging, and they need to be able to learn if there's any sound in the sky that means there's a raptor bird nearby, or means there's an insect over here. They have to be able to learn about that relationship. Nature has placed them in a niche, in an environment where learning is demanded of them, and indeed they show it. So
okay, so
story.
Like many people, animals don't do more than they need to do.
That's true.
Why bother, if you can have a happy life eating grass, peacefully, and no need more.
Totally.
So how did you make the jump, or how did you move from the marsupials to the dogs?
Well, right. So that's a great question. So I love the marsupials. That was Australia. But for a variety of reasons, I moved to the United States. Once I was in the United States, it wasn't really practical to consider studying marsupials anymore.
Yeah.
And I was also, I was getting on. I guess I was in my 40s by this point. And I'd been promoted at the university. I had tenure. So it's time to sort of take stock. It's time to stop and think, what have I been doing? Am I still enjoying? And I realized I was still completely fascinated by the minds of animals. Mm-hmm. But I also realized that I was getting kind of obsessed with the relationship between people and their animals. And I wanted to move into some species and where I could still be studying the minds of animals, but also how human minds and animal minds interact. And I feel kind of stupid when I tell people this story, because you know the end of the story. I study dogs. Obviously, that's the right place for me to be.
Yeah.
So you would think I would have got it like that yeah, it's time to switch from fat-tailed Dunnuts to dogs. But actually, it took me several years to figure this out. And I went through my own period wandering in the wilderness, where I thought maybe I should be studying chimpanzees. And I actually started doing historical research into people in the past who had kept chimpanzees and gorillas and other great apes as pets in their homes. These are completely crazy people, right? I mean, if you're thinking of, if anybody listening to this is thinking of getting an exotic pet, get a wolf, not a chimpanzee. And the reason for that is that the wolf will kill you quickly and cleanly, right? The wolf will go for your jugular and you'll bleed out in a few minutes.
Okay.
Whereas the chimpanzee is going to bite off your nose, bite off your fingers. If you're a man, it's going to bite off your penis.
Okay.
You will probably survive the attack, but you will probably wish you hadn't, right? I mean, it is so. Anyway, so these were completely crazy people. They were wonderfully colorful stories, but I'm an experimentalist. There's no way. I mean,
yeah.
So, okay. So it's embarrassing that it took me so long, but when I finally realized that I needed to be studying dogs, I am so satisfied in my professional life. I feel that I'm such an enviable person that I have stumbled finally, it's 15 years now, onto something so absolutely stunningly fascinating, honestly.
And was it related to your dog, Xephos? That's how you pronounce the name of your dog?
Xephos. Or she'll come in if we keep saying her name. So no, not directly, Esther. Okay. So this came to me first during a period. I've had dogs at many different phases of my life, but not all the time. And when we moved to the United States, we had a new baby and we weren't sure, we didn't feel stable enough to bring a dog into our lives. We didn't know at first whether we would stay in the United States or go back to Australia or what we might do. So when I first started dog research, I did not have a dog in my own life.
Oh, sorry. Was it related to the research done by some people about the point finger? So
what made me, So what made me realize that I ought to be studying dogs, so this is the early 2000s, and this is it was like 1998, 1999, that some researchers, in particular Adam Miklosi in Budapest, Hungary, and Brian Hare, who at that time was at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, they started publishing papers on this question of how do dogs understand people? Is there something special about how dogs understand people? That was the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And I started reading these papers, and actually I read pretty much all of them, and we published a review summarizing what was being done. And that convinced me that this was a very exciting field to get into. And it connected to my memories of dogs that I'd lived with before, particularly the dog we had when I was a kid. But we didn't get Xephos until a couple of years later.
Okay. And so it was about at the same time. So the research you did about finger pointing to an animal, and can the animal follow the movement? Did it disprove the research of the people you just mentioned? Did it disprove this research? It did.
So I think, I mean, if you got certainly Brian Hare on your show, he would obviously disagree. But my opinion is, I mean, nothing Brian did was wrong. No. Let's not get out of context. I mean, Brian and Adam, fantastic innovators, terrific work, and I believe everything that they found. So I believe that they found dogs commonly follow human pointing gestures. And anybody listening can try this if they haven't already. Yeah. If you point, your dog will go where you point. Yeah. And I believe that the wolves that they tested did not follow their pointing gestures as they reported. So this is the crucial thing. Yeah. I agree that the majority of pet dogs pay attention to what people are doing, pay exquisite attention to what people are doing, and in particular will follow a human pointing gesture. I believe that to be true. However, I do not believe that that is what makes dogs special. It is not unique to dogs.
That's
I believe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe that it occurs in any animal that is reared by human beings and develops a strong bond with human beings, and then through the rest of its life remains dependent on what people do in order to get the things that that animal needs in its life. Now, that is commonly the case for our dogs. Hundreds of millions of dogs live like that. To some degree, cats don't have such good vision, so we can't expect them to see as much, but cats also, right? There are other domesticated animals that this could be true of. It's been shown in dolphins. Well, dolphins are not domesticated animals, but you do find it, right? So you do find it in non-domesticated animals, in those rare cases where individuals from a non-domesticated species are taken into people's lives with the same degree of intensity. So you do find it in wolves. We found it in wolves at Wolf Park in Indiana. Though those people out there at Wolf Park have been hand-rearing wolves since 1974. That's a long time. They're really, really good at hand-rearing wolves, and their wolves follow human pointing gestures. You find it, I don't know, people have found it, you can find it in horses, but only, most horses no, because most horses are accustomed to receiving instruction from people sitting on their backs. Yeah. Well, there's no point, it doesn't matter what hand gestures you make when you're sitting on the back of a horse, the horse can't see you. But for reasons I don't completely understand, there is another school of horse training called Pirelli training. And the Pirelli people like standing in front of their horses and making gestures. And sure enough, their horses follow gestures. So it's not about what species you belong to. It's about what kind of a life are you leading. That's what's crucial.
Can you tell us bring us with you through the main steps of your investigation on the explanation you finally found how affection is crucial in the relationship between dogs and humans, you know?
Right. So Brian Hare, Adam Miclosi are out there claiming that dogs have special forms of cognition, special kinds of intelligence.
And you say, no, it's affection.
I say, no, it doesn't seem to be, they don't seem to have special forms of intelligence. That's my view. But now I'm kind of stuck. What is it then? If it's not their intelligence, what is it? And that's where Xephos comes into the story, because it was around this time, after I've been studying dogs for a few years, that we bring this dog into our lives. And it's immediately apparent that she's not one of those really super smart dogs. I mean, that's just not her thing. But she is incredibly affectionate. And at first, I don't see how this connects to my kind of intellectual interests, but there comes a point where I realize that actually it's this amazing propensity, drive, desire to form strong emotional bonds. And that's what makes dogs so unique. And I start thinking about it with my scientific hat on, and I realize that actually there are studies going back to the 1950s and 60s. For that matter, even Pavlov in the end of the 19th century, he actually, it's not often talked about, but he actually noticed this himself and wrote about it. So it's actually, and I mean, people have always known this about dogs, that they form strong bonds with people. But so I started making it a kind of a scientific focus and thinking about how, you know, we can just call it love, right? I mean, ordinary people, that's the word they would use. But you won't find love in the scientific literature, right? You have to think about how is this common phrase made into a scientific term.
So you came up with all kind of they are gregarious.
Gregarious, yes.
Gregarious. And you came up with a bunch of words
to
describe love.
Right. So one phrase that we and other people have used is exceptional gregariousness,
Oh, that's it.
which is a heck of a lot of syllables for what can be expressed with the single syllable word love, right?
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
the scientific literature, we need these things. I mean, to be fair, I mean, I'm sort of laughing at the scientific literature, but of course, love as a phrase covers a vast
That's
range
it,
of
and
possible
we'll talk about
activities.
it later. Maybe love between humans is not totally the same than love between a human and his animal, his dog.
Right, exactly.
So maybe there's a question of degree.
Well, and the nature, there's romantic love,
Yeah,
there's
that's
parental love. There are many different ways, fraternal love. There are many different ways that we mean that. And that, of course, is why science quite legitimately tries to come up with technical terms to kind of fence off
which is a good
part
thing.
of. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you turn to biology to try to explain, dogs' affection for their owners. So you found, I think, oxytocin and common heartbeat. What can you tell us about what you found in biology before we turn to genetics?
Okay. Well, so the biological research is not my own research. I mustn't take credit for other people's work. Yeah. But in my book, Dog is Love, I talk about the different levels of scientific analysis, biological analysis that have been applied to this. Yeah. And so I had the good fortune to visit a researcher at Azabu University in the suburbs of Tokyo. And they have a lab where they study how people and their dogs interact. But in addition, they have the kind of medical research equipment that you need to be able to study hormones in the body. And so there is this hormone, oxytocin, which people call the love hormone, because it tends to be released when people are together with people that they are in a strong, really intense emotional connection with. First discovered in mothers and their infants, and later in new romantic couples, not old married couples, but new romantic couples. And so this research group at Azabu University, they brought people and their dogs together into the lab, and they just had them look at each other. Before and after, they take a urine sample, and they can analyze that for the levels of oxytocin. And what they found was that when a person and their dog who are in a very strong emotional relationship, and they ask them some questions, the person, of course, not the dog, some questions about the strength of the relationship. And if they then are looking in each other's eyes, then you see that the levels of oxytocin spike on both sides of that partnership. So that's that's one line of evidence of how the biology of the dog and the human show a loving relationship.
And it's part of your quest to an answer to your question, that ended up in genetics. But before we turn to genetics, can you tell us about the experiment of the synchronicity of heartbeat between an owner and his or her dog?
Sure. So this is from Australia, from my friend Mia Cobb. And what they did was nowadays, actually, people have wrist devices that measure heartbeats, but the slightly older technology and also more reliable is to strap a monitor on the heart with a strap around the chest. And you can take the exact same devices and you can strap them onto the chest of a dog. You probably want to shave off some of the fur, but it's quite straightforward. And so they have heart rate. They have people and their dogs, and they have a heart rate monitor on the person and on the dog. And they just ask the person to come into a room and sit down on a sofa, and they record the heartbeats. And then they invite the dog into the room, and the dog runs over and jumps up onto the sofa and snuggles next to the person. And what you see is not just that the heart rates in both partners go down, which of course you'd expect as they're relaxing, but that they actually become synchronized. They actually become their hearts beat in synchrony, just like in the song, two hearts beating as one. It's so tremendously cute. And again, it shows us how the body responds to the strength of the bond.
Okay, so all this was part of your quest toward an answer or an explanation of dogs' affection for their owners. When did you take the step to look into genetics?
Well, right. So if there is something about a species or a subspecies that makes them different from other species, it ultimately has to be encoded in their DNA. It has to be in the genetic material. That's definitional in biology. But it's very difficult finding genetics for behavior, because behavior is not like eye color. It doesn't turn out the way it turns out in this, right? Behavior depends crucially on every experience you have in your life. Is, you know, the fact that I'm a native English speaker and you're a native French speaker, that's not in our genetics. That's our experience.
Where we were born and raised.
Right. And many behaviors are very difficult to track down in the genes. So I knew that if my theory was right, there needed to be something in the genes, but I was not very optimistic that we would be able to find it. So for me, this is one of the most exciting pieces of science I've been involved in. And I cannot take all the credit. It started because a young geneticist, Bridget von Holt, did a study where she went through the genome of the dog and compared it step by step to the genome of the wolf. So we know all of our dogs are descended from wolves. And so this is how you look to see what the evolutionary process that led to dogs, what that did at the genetic level. And, you know, these genetic papers, you ever tried to read a paper in genetics? They're so boring, you know. I'm so interested in the subject matter, and yet the scientific paper is so hard to read and so boring, and no part of it really seems to be at all interesting until I find this tiny single sentence that says, we found a mutation in a part of the genome that in human beings, if there's damage around here, you get this thing called Williams-Buren syndrome.
It was the proverbial needle in the haystack.
Absolutely. So I go and look it up. You know, what is Williams-Buren syndrome? So it's a very, very rare genetic disorder. It's damage to around 28 genes. So it's a big genetic impact. And because so many genes are involved, it has a lot of effects on a person. They have strange facial structure. They have heart deficits. They have a whole bunch of things. But the most interesting thing they have is exceptional gregariousness. People with Williams-Buren syndrome are unbelievably friendly. They're unbelievably friendly. As children, they are at risk. They also have intellectual handicaps. They are at risk because you simply cannot explain the concept of stranger danger.
Yeah, don't talk to strangers.
Yeah, they have no idea about this.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm thinking, but you could say that about dogs too, right? A lot of dogs, my dog, I mean, she does actually have a little bit of a sense of stranger danger, but once you let somebody in the house, she loves everybody. And so I was thinking, wow, this is a really tempting connection. Could there be something in this? And so one of my graduate students, Monique Udell, who's now a professor at Oregon State University, she actually met Bridget von Holt at a conference and they got talking about this. And so the three of us got to thinking about how we could develop a study to focus in and see whether some of these 28 genes are okay. And so first we have to come up with a very simple test of affection for people. And so this is one of the simplest experiments we ever invented. And I love simple experiments. Anybody can try this. Mark a 1 meter circle around a chair. Use meters in Quebec, 1 meter circle around a chair. Separate yourself from your dog for 10 minutes. Sit down in the chair. Have somebody let your dog into the room where you are. Have a camera on you. Measure how much time does your dog spend inside the circle with you. We give the dogs just 2 minutes. And what we find is that most pet dogs spend pretty much the whole time inside the circle. It's just 2 minutes after they've been separated, pretty much the whole time inside the circle. Then we go out to Wolf Park in Indiana and we repeat this test on these beautifully hand-reared wolves. We use the people who acted as the wolves' mothers when they were young, and the people that they see every day that they definitely have a relationship with and they are definitely interested in, but it's not the same level of intensity. It's about 30 seconds out of 2 minutes. It's about a quarter of the time. Then we send Bridget von Holt DNA samples, just mouth swabs,
Yeah.
from the dogs we've tested and from the wolves we've tested. We don't tell her which are which. We just ask her, and then we put the genetic data in a relationship with the behavioral data for each individual animal, and we see what pops out. And so we have actually, by this method, been able to identify 3 genes that mutated in the journey that wolves took from dogs. These 3 genes are the genes that contribute to this behavioral difference between the wolves and the dogs. And they are 3 genes that are among the 28 genes affected in Williams-Beuren syndrome, and that by independent research on people with Williams syndrome and on genetically modified mice have been demonstrated to be genes that are responsible for how friendly an individual is. And if you or I have mutations in these genes, we'd be even more friendly than we are. So it's really, really exciting, and exciting because it's surprising, because although we know in principle, if we've identified what makes dogs special, it must show up in their genes. In practice, finding genes for behavior is very, very challenging because, of course, how friendly an individual is not just due to their genes, right? I mean, it's your experience of life that makes you such a lovable person. So it was a very pleasant surprise to be able to pin this down.
You wrote that dogs can form close connection with other beings than humans. Can you tell us about the relationship between dogs and the little penguins living on offshore island in Australia?
Right. So Esther, I often talk about dogs having a propensity to form bonds with people.
Yeah.
And that's true, but it could be viewed slightly misleadingly. And it is not the case that dogs are born with a special propensity to form bonds with people. It is the case that dogs are born with a special propensity to form bonds with members of other species, so long as they meet individuals from that species in the first 3 months of life.
So if it's a human being, they're gonna form a bond with a human being.
Exactly. Which of course it is. It mostly is. It mostly is human beings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly for the dogs we know and love, it must be human beings. But if you arrange things so that the puppies meet something else early in life, they'll grow up looking to form loving bonds with that something else. And ranchers know about this because they use livestock guarding dogs to guard their sheep and their goats and whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And the trick is just put the puppies with the goats, with the sheep. Yeah. And in my book, I write about how I went and visited some goat ranches, and it's rich and interesting. But while I was doing this, I found the cutest possible example of this phenomenon, which, as you say, is on this island off the south coast of the state of Victoria in Australia. And there they have these penguins, little penguins, which are not just small penguins, that's a species name, little penguins. And unfortunately, the island they live on is a little bit too close to the mainland. And at certain times of year, foxes have been able to get out onto the island and they decimate the penguin population. And the local people had no idea what to do. They couldn't fence off the island There was a nearby chicken farmer who had free-range chickens, and he has dogs guarding his chickens. And he says, hey, if they'll take care of the chickens, maybe they'll take care of penguins. And that's exactly what they do now. They take dogs, they put the dogs with penguins when the dogs are puppies, and these dogs grow up looking to care for penguins. And at least in the summer, they put the dogs in kennels out on the island, and the dogs go around. And they made a stupid children's movie of it. It's very cute. It's called Oddball, which was the name of the first.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Pretty stupid movie, but it's very cute to see.
So we often hear the expression, at least in popular culture, oh, a dog has an unconditional love for his human, but it's not unconditional love. It's not love without any condition.
Right. Well, I'm not sure how do we operationalize the phrase unconditional. I think it's not like dogs would do anything for their human.
No.
but they are astonishingly in tune with their human. So I don't want to underestimate. I mean, there's a very simple study experiment from London that anybody who wants to could do. London, England, not London,
Yeah.
Ontario.
Okay.
You just pretend to cry. Just pretend to cry.
Yeah.
You don't even have to be that good at pretending, and
Yeah.
your dog will get very, very upset.
Okay.
But at the same time, so I think dogs do love with a remarkable intensity. I think it is heartfelt. But what's interesting is, I think, that dogs can also move on. So I know some people are anxious about adopting an adult dog from a shelter. And you really, because they think, well, it would be like trying to adopt a teenage child, right? If you're going to adopt a child, you'd like to adopt a baby, because by the time an individual is a teenager, they've gone through the phase of forming their earliest, strongest bonds, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like that with dogs. It's very clear that dogs can form new bonds more readily than people can. That isn't to say that they aren't sad to be taken away from one home and put into another home. And nobody has made yet a truly scientific study of this. But I think it's pretty clear that dogs can and do move on, probably in a couple or 3 weeks, perhaps a month. So dogs do love intensely. I do believe that. But they also enter into new relationships more easily and can move on from relationships more easily. And things that when you think about a human life, if somebody loses a parent when they're a child, that is a scar that probably stays with them throughout their life. That's clearly not true in our dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it's not true in dog families. Dogs do not miss, well, most dogs never knew their fathers, right? Let's face it.
Yeah.
And I don't think the dog grew up missing their mothers because they, were separated from 2 months of age.
No.
So dogs, I believe, do love with a certain intensity, but that they do move on more easily than we do in our own species, which is good.
Thank you so much for this most interesting interview.
Fantastic. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.